Good evening, Jim.
Is Pastor
My name is
Jim?
Jim Westmoreland. I'm the current chair of the ITRI Advisory Council. I wanted to welcome you this evening to the 2011 TFF Speaker Series. I think I've seen many of you here before as we have had this series, and I always find it's a good, interesting event. Tonight's topic is transportation as an enabler of economic development. I think from my perspective, both in working in the NCDOT now and formerly with the City of Greensboro and serving in a role as an Assistant City Manager for Economic Development, I certainly understand and know how transportation ties us to both economic development and community and jobs. And I think it will be interesting to go through the presentation, both hearing from our keynote speaker and then afterwards with an active, engaging panel discussion. I think you'll find that there's many things that we do together that ties together through transportation and economic development. Before we go any further, we do have some superstars in our ranks tonight. And I want to specifically call three people out. These individuals this past week happened to be down in Lafayette, Louisiana with me at the Southern District ITE meeting, where I am proud and privileged to say they brought home the bacon. They won the Southern District ITE Traffic Bowl Championship, and because of that, they're going to be headed up to St. Louis in August at the International ITE Board meeting to represent the whole Southern District of ITE. So, Zach, stand up. Katie, stand up. Soho, stand up. Let's give them all a big whoop. In looking at tonight's agenda, again, we do have a good time planned for you. We've got a good keynote presentation coming from Janet
Kavinoky.
Yeah. I will slow down from Janet Kavinoky, and I'll let her introduce herself to you as she gets up here. But she's with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and I think you're going to find that she's got some interesting information to share about what's going on at the national level. Then we'll have a good panel discussion afterwards. We do have 4 panelists for you this evening, including Dr. George List. George, raise your hand. Secretary Eugene Conti. G, raise your hand. Janet, you can raise your hand again.
Okay.
And then Joe Stevens with FedEx. So I think we're in for a good treat there. The next item of business, what I'd like to do is to introduce you specifically to Pat Sobrero. See, you got me all messed up saying the sombrero. I said, well, I'm going to say sombrero. That is with the Office of Extension. I need some glasses on. Office of Extension, Engagement, and Economic Development with NC State University. We're glad to have you this evening. Can you come please share a few remarks?
Thank you. It is truly an honor to be here with you tonight. And don't feel too bad about the sombrero part. It took me a couple of years to get it all figured out. So good evening. On behalf of Chancellor Woodson and the Office of Extension, Engagement, and Economic Development, it's truly a pleasure to welcome you to the North Carolina State Institute for Transportation Research Education Transportation Founders Fun Speaker Series. That is really a mouthful, and I hated to just say ITRI, but I knew you would all know. We commend you on your 10th year of the TFF Speaker Series, and especially for creating an avenue for experts in the areas of business, industry, government, nonprofits, higher education, and public and private education to come together to address the complex transportation issues of society while embracing issues in our economy. Your theme this evening, Transportation as an Enabler of Economic Development, is an excellent example of addressing societal issues through collaboration and logistics planning. I looked up logistics after I talked to you, George. So let me refresh your memory just in case you've forgotten what that means. Logistics is the management and flow of goods and services between the point of origin and the point of consumption in order to meet the requirements of customers. However, the description goes a little further. Logistics involves the integration of information, transportation, inventory, warehousing, handling, packaging, and often security. Logistics is a channel of the supply chain, which adds value of time and place while contributing to either economic profit or loss. ITRI, under the leadership of Dr. Nagy Raphael, and your excellent work together and the NC State Logistics Task Force is creating analysis of very complex production logistics, and then modeling, analyzing, visualizing, and optimizing this information in order to plan for transportation that will improve our economy in North Carolina. NC State is committed to this approach. We work closely with each of the sectors that I mentioned earlier as partners to attract new business, retain employers, and become a reliable collaborator, creating access to our intellectual capital in the university that will benefit partners once they locate here. That's what Centennial Campus is all about. We also link with other partners in the UNC system or public and private institutions of higher learning. Our Economic Development Partnership Program, which is something you may or may not know about, developed an innovative precision marketing program, and this little handout will tell you a little bit about it. This is based on economic clusters that were first coined by Dr. Michael Porter of Harvard. The model targets key cluster areas for companies with a proven capacity to flourish in our state. If you open your chart to this page, the one that looks kind of like this with the dots, you will see across the top a who and a what. I think this chart shows you how our university works in a seamless way with economic developers to really attract and eventually get and keep new businesses and industries. Then if you will look down this side, one of the things that George talked to me about was about 8 clusters that have been identified by the Logistics Task Force. And all 8 of them are in this list. Well, when I looked at it, not being the expert perhaps that some of you are, I could really see how transportation, if you look at that bigger view of transportation, fits every single cluster. Then I'd like to ask you to look at one other area, and that's this little chart on the side that shows our state and shows where these clusters are located. If you take a look at that, you're going to see immediately how logistics planning not only benefits a cluster, but it benefits a community of place in our state. So I hope you will continue to look at this bigger systematic picture of transportation logistics and look at the way that your work connects to these high priority clusters for North Carolina.
I'm going to ask that question.
Well, yeah, it's
Now I would like to share with you 2 points that I hope you will take away when you leave here tonight. Let me just say, first of all, I also handed out an article that was written by Tom White, who is our Director of Economic Development Partnership. This was published last May and June for the Charlotte Triangle Construction News. I think if you look at that article, you get a better understanding of how we work in a big collaborative, seamless way with attracting industry and involving all of these sectors to make North Carolina a better place to live and work. So I hope you'll take 2 things away tonight after you listen to the panel and as you digest what is heard today. I hope you will take away this area. 1, North Carolina State and North Carolina have tremendous capacity and strength and national reputation as leaders in transportation and logistics. So talk to some of these students and find out why they came. That's why they're here. Second, As an organization, ITRI has incredible ability to convene and support cross-sector partnerships, planning with data-driven decision-making scenarios that will advance our state economically and enhance the quality of lives for our families and communities. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Pat, very much. I got my glasses so I can see things now. Next on the agenda is Janet Kavinoky. She's going to give us an update about things going on with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Washington, D.C. Welcome.
Thank you very much. My Diet Coke was so far away from me, I was beginning to shake. Thank you so much for having me. I want to in particular thank Bob Clark, who I first met when I started at USDOT 15 years ago. I was 22. I was fresh out of college. I'd come to Washington because what else do political science majors do, right? They go to Washington. And I thought I'm going to go work on Capitol Hill. And I was born and raised in Wyoming. We have one member of Congress and 2 senators, as you might know, and not a whole lot of jobs. So I was looking around that summer where it was 105 degrees in August trying to figure out what I was going to do. And somebody said, oh, well, we know of a program where they're trying to find people to do rural issues in federal departments. It was being done through an economic development organization within USDA. And they said, you're from Wyoming, you know rural issues. What do you want to do? Do you want to do health and human services? You want to do transportation? It was kind of a coin flip for me, and I said, I'll go to transportation. So here I am, 15 years later, after my first day at work with my boss saying I was going to work on iced tea reauthorization. And I dutifully wrote down iced tea with a question mark. Had no idea what I was talking about. I ended up spending 4 years at DOT overlapping with Gene Conti before I went to business school. I went to business school because I decided I didn't want to go to law school, which is what everybody else in Washington does. Somebody finally asked me, do you want to be a lawyer? And I said, no, not really. And they said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to go, we can figure out how we sort of lead organizations and make change. They said, you should go to business school. So I was fortunate enough to apply and get into Stanford, which is very forgiving for those of us who are not, as we call them, quant jocks. So yes, I learned how to use Excel, learned how to do a little modeling, but in talking to some of the students, you guys are way, way beyond me. I found my way back into transportation. I spent 5 years at AASHTO, working then on T21 reauthorization. I knew what it was at that point in time. And about 5 years ago, moved to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So my job at the Chamber is varied, and I am happy to answer questions on any aspect of my job, because really for me this is also about hearing from you. First and foremost, I'm the Chamber's policy director and lobbyist on anything transportation related. So we say if it floats, flies, or rolls, we do it. The Chamber is engaged for the exact examples you gave, Chancellor, in transportation infrastructure because we recognize its relationship to economic development. So much so that after I started at the Chamber, Tom Donahue, who is my boss, who ran the American Trucking Associations for 10 years and now runs the Chamber, said we need to do something more with infrastructure, not just transportation, but transportation, energy, water, and broadband. And so we started the Let's Rebuild America initiative. Maybe not terribly creatively named, but I didn't pick the name, my bosses did. Therefore, it is a brilliant name for an effort where we do research, we do events, communications, advertising, write blog posts, and develop ideas and look both in long term about what is needed in transportation and other areas of infrastructure in the economy, and also trying to reinforce what we've got to do on a daily basis with Capitol Hill. The other hat I wear that I spend way too much of my time doing, but I'm happy to talk ad nauseum about, is I lead the Americans for Transportation Mobility Coalition. It's our coalition of business, labor, highway, and transit interests. And our sole focus is increasing federal funding for highways and public transportation. So whether it's 60,000 feet in the air and infrastructure generally in the economy, or having conversations about what we should do about truck size and weight, I kind of handle that whole deal. And there is all of that going on in Washington. But if I can have you take away anything from the time I'm talking to you, it is so important right now to build a very strong narrative around how transportation supports the economy. And that also means, and particularly for you students, and I was talking to a couple of you earlier, it is so important that you can tie the work you're doing here at the university to how it improves how well the transportation system works, how it generates jobs, not just in the near term for the construction industry and related industries, but in the long term for economic growth and development. Because let me tell you, had I worked on Capitol Hill as a 22-year-old staffer, I would have had people like me coming in, and I'm going to start explaining all sorts of things. And you know what we really need to do? We really need to go out and increase federal funding for transportation. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means you're going to have to actually find revenues. What does that mean? Well, you have to boost taxes. That's, we know. This is the hazard in transportation. We know what the needs are. We know what the challenges are. We believe it. We lay awake at night thinking about it. Okay, maybe just I do. But if the rest of you do, I feel much better about that. And we want to go in and make the best argument possible, because that's first and foremost my job at the Chamber. How do I make the best possible argument for investing in infrastructure? But without a good story behind it, without the ability to point to success in the past, or point to enough success in the past that they believe that Gene's organization can deliver on what we're asking, and without a good solid set of plans and a good vision for the future, that 22-year-old is not going into their member of Congress to say, you know what, you've got to take a really tough vote. We need you to go out and take a vote to do something like increase the gas tax. Because, the Chamber came in and they said that was really good. So a big part of my job right now is building a narrative. And sometimes those narratives come from stories like, and I'm going to slaughter your name. Is it Suhail? Did I say that kind of right? Yes. We were talking about a project that he's working on through the National Highway Cooperative Research Program, which we all know as NCHRP, but try and explain that to a Capitol Hill staffer. You work to create a program that will let NCDOT and other entities do better modeling around work zones so that they can better plan to manage those work zones. Well, why does that matter? It matters because the public really hates sitting in traffic. And when they sit in traffic and they see a work zone, they don't think about the jobs that have been created. And they don't think about the benefit that project will bring. They think, darn it, what in the world is Gene Conti doing at NCDOT? I can't believe I'm sitting in this traffic. Because that's the way the public thinks. And so your ability, and this organization's ability, to say, we're doing some really important research, funded by the taxpayers, that we can put to work making the transportation system work better, because it's going to take less time to do a project, people are going to sit in traffic less, and at the end of the day, they're going to have the public trust and confidence in NCDOT that when I go to one of your members of Congress and say, we need increased federal investment, and we need to increase investment in research, and I can say, here's an example of some research that turned into real practice. That's the kind of story we've got to tell in Washington. Because here is the situation in Washington right now. We have a Congress that is emboldened. Now, when I say Congress, remember, we've got a House and we've got a Senate. But in both of those areas, you have new members of Congress who are focused like a laser on one thing, and that's reducing the federal deficit and reducing the debt that this country takes out. And so the mantra, if you've been reading anything in the news, I don't care whether you get it off a Drudge Report or the Washington Post or People magazine, is we have to cut spending, we have to get costs under control, and then the brave ones say we've got to do something about Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. At which point people start screaming and shouting, but that's just a Washington thing anyway. But transportation's not an exception. I work for an organization that deals with a lot of issues. Now, if I were a single-member organization, if I were just at I'm going to use my friend Tim James at the International Union of Operating Engineers as an example. Tim has one focus: get that federal money for transportation to put our people to work. And he is a very effective advocate for that. But I can't say, dear Mr. President and Congress, we really think we need to reduce the budget deficit, and we commend you for thinking about doing something with Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, and we've got to get our handle on other kinds of spending, but P.S. not transportation, because that stuff's really good. It is a really tough environment where big organizations like ours, and we are if you don't know the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and why would you, we are the 800-pound gorilla in the lobbying world. We are the world's largest business federation. We have 300,000 members. I've got small businesses. I've got the biggest companies in the world. I have chambers of commerce. We are a powerhouse in lobbying. But even that doesn't really help move the ball. So what matters is when your members hear from you, and they hear that we have transportation problems in North Carolina that require federal leadership to solve. And we're not hearing enough of that. And that's not a criticism of people in this room, but it's easy to get people riled up over health care. Oh my God, was it easy to get people riled up over health care. Taxes, even easier. Transportation, meh. What can you do? So it's a challenging environment to both get Congress to think about something that's not just related to the debt and the deficit. And by the way, we're going to spend about 2 more months doing nothing but that, and it's going to be great political theater, I suppose, but frustrating when you're trying to get the ball moving on reauthorization bills. And getting them focused will also require giving them the reason to see that if we invest more, we can do more with it. And so that's why a lot of the research that you're doing and the ability to get that research into practice ends up being really important. In addition, coming and selling to Washington what you were able to do in a way that's not very technical but can help move the ball on that. So what's Congress doing anyway? Well, the first thing in transportation, so let's be ecumenical on all transportation, is I actually think they're going to pass an FAA reauthorization bill. That is only a minor miracle. It is only 4 years late. It will probably only be funded at 2008 levels, but it will probably include some good things like accelerating next generation air traffic control. I think the only thing that derails getting this bill done is if there's so much distraction over this air traffic controller falling asleep issue that suddenly Congress says, oh my God, we can't pass this bill without doing something about that. And Congress is really good at getting distracted. Has anybody seen the movie Up? And there's the dog, and the dog's like, squirrel! Okay, that's Congress. Squirrel! And all of a sudden, they're like running after the squirrel for 6 weeks. And we're like, hello, surface transportation bill, got to get done. They're like, squirrel! So, getting stuff done in Congress is not the Schoolhouse Rock version, right? Not easy for a bill to become a law. We have until September 30th, technically, to pass either an extension or a fully funded transportation bill. So let's work back from there. It typically takes, at least historically, takes about 4 to 6 months to conference a transportation bill. So September, August, July, June. So we really need Congress, we need both houses of Congress to pass a transportation bill by April 1st. And it usually takes them, once a bill passes out of committee, it takes about a month to get floor time in the House and the Senate, which is a very inside baseball Washington thing. So we should have been applying for floor time March 1st. And you got to go through the process of actually introducing and then marking up a bill. And so that kind of should have been February 1st. Does everybody see where I'm going with this? We have a very compressed time period. So here's what the choices are starting to look like. And you can question whether these are the right choices or not, and I hope you will. So the choices are, okay, well, we can try and do that full bill, but we know we're not going to get it done. But we can do what we do really well in Washington and say, we're not giving up. We're doing a full bill by September 30th. And then we'll all start galloping towards September 30th, and about September 29th, we'll end up passing an extension. And then we'll be back doing this all over again next year. We can choose to try and do something like a policy-only bill. So there are a lot of reforms that have been recognized that are needed. How do you get projects done faster? What can you do to streamline the NEPA process? How can we squeeze more dollars out of, more project out of every dollar? Should we consolidate some of the federal programs? There's a lot of ideas, and actually when you start talking to staff and members, there's some agreement on those ideas. We might be able to write a policy-only bill. Problem is that transportation bills historically don't pass as policy-only bills. Because why would a member vote for a policy-only transportation bill when over history the way they vote for bills is to get a chart that says, Here's how much you got in the last bill. Here's how much you're going to get in this bill. Less, more, vote. Well, in this case, if we do policy-only bill, here's the problem. How much you got in the last bill is about 35% more than you're going to get in this bill because we don't have the money. If the people in this room do not understand the Highway Trust Fund situation, I will be more than happy to give you a tutorial, but I would be shocked if you did not, which is why I'm not dwelling or putting up charts to explain to you why in 2013 we're going to fall off a huge cliff and you're going to have 30 to 40% less money to work with. But Congress does not want to grapple with that. So when people ask me the question, is Congress going to get a bill done by September 30th? I am always the bearer of the bad news, and that's a really bad thing for an advocate to do because my job is to come here and get you fired up and to get you to say, I am going to call my members of Congress today, and I'm going to tell them they've got to get working on getting a bill done. The reality is I'm not sure that there's actually enough time, like in the sense of physics time, and I'm not sure that you can figure out the new way of passing a bill with less money. And on top of which, organizations like mine have made it a tenet that we will not accept a transportation bill that does not provide significantly increased funding. So when I get a call from Chairman Micah's staff in the House T&I Committee that says, this is the best I can do, you've got to support me on this bill, I'm going to be in a really tough position, and the chamber's going to be in a tough position. Do we say it's better to get certainty for the next 6 years in policy and maybe make a run at more money later? Or do I say, nope, we're going to fight you on this, we're going to go ahead and go after an extension and see if we can do it all again? I will tell you right now, I don't have a good answer to the choice I'm going to make. Generally, publicly, we will say we need to see the process moving forward, which is code in Washington for I'm not sure I like this or I don't like it, but I can't say I don't like it, so we're going to keep watching the process move forward, and we're going to keep pushing those things. But we have got to hear more and more from outside the Beltway, and we also have to hear more from business stakeholders. And this is the last point I'll make because I know we want to get to the panel. We are constantly asked to broaden the group and broaden the conversation of stakeholders in transportation. We have great partners in that like FedEx, always at the table, because FedEx's offices are on the road or in the sky and infrastructure directly affects them. But what people really want me to do is go get Walmart and Kraft and Home Depot. And this is where this question of logistics comes in, because I can't motivate Walmart to go to Capitol Hill with me and say, would you please increase the gas tax? What I can do is see if I can, and coming back to where I started at the beginning, help them come and help us build the narrative so that we can show that business does care, that it does influence decisions. Great paper that just came out from the Organization for International Investment. They took a lot of the foreign headquartered companies who choose to build plants in the United States and locate jobs in the United States, create jobs in the United States. And they as a group just put out a paper that said, we're going to lose our competitive edge. Our companies can go anywhere in the world. They can build a plant anywhere in the world. They can create jobs anywhere in the world. But you've got to start paying attention to your infrastructure because other countries are catching up. And while that might not be the deciding factor, today the United States has the highest corporate tax rates of any country in the OECD. We were second to Japan. They just raised theirs. In the 80s, Reagan put us at the lowest corporate tax rate. Great for competitiveness, but other countries caught up. They said, we see how this is going to work. And so over time, they've gone past us. Companies exporting from the United States abroad face about a 10% tariff rate. We have lowered our tariffs to welcome trade. So companies that are exporting to us pay a 2% tariff rate. So you look at things like that, structural competitiveness issues, and you realize that here's the kind of last piece of this. Because we're going to talk about economic development locally and at a state level, but at a national level, other countries in the world think about their foreign policy in terms of trade, competitiveness, and economics. we continue to think about our foreign policy in terms of humanitarian aid, foreign aid, and military action. And so we've also, in addition to all of the great technical things we're thinking about, have to try and figure out how we adopt a mindset so that it's not just about transportation is important for jobs and economic development at a local level or a state level, but that it is part of that package that draws companies here to create the 20 million jobs we're going to have to create in this country to keep people working into the future. So I really appreciate being able to be here. Looking forward to our panel, and I'll try and answer other Washington-related questions for you if I can, and I didn't even get to the Water Resources Development Act, so we can talk about that later. All right, thank you. Do you want us just to sit?
Come on up. I'll invite the panel up at this time.
Oh, let's get her.
What I'm going to do is to give each panelist a few minutes to make an opening comment or introductory comment to give us some perspective about how they see transportation as an enabler of economic development. I'll start with you, George, since you're right here.
Thank you very much. My job today is not really to give you a long lecture about things that I'm doing or my perspective on this, but rather to facilitate the discussion among the panelists that are here. Having said that, let me just give you a sense of where we are and what the topic is about. As was said, to gain a perspective on the relationship between infrastructure investment and economic development, certainly to listen to a government perspective on that topic, to hear private industry, particularly a service provider, and the perspective that that person brings to the topic, engage you in a discussion about ways to enhance the synergy between those two, and I hope develop some new ideas about how transportation investment decision-making and economic development can work together. There'll be a quiz. Yeah. The idea clearly relates to infrastructure and economic development. And as you might remember, or maybe not, historically infrastructure, particularly transportation infrastructure, was about commerce and not about personal transport. So in the context of this discussion, in many ways, we're returning to our roots. We are talking about coordinated logistics planning, transportation and commerce, state and local governments, statewide logistics planning and decision-making, and staging, particularly in a public context, a game plan and a playbook. The overall vision is to have a strategic infrastructure investment, if you will, master planning for land use. And I think the importance of land use is profound. In some ways, this discussion is more about land use than it is about transportation. The engagement of the business world, both new and old, the ones that are already here as well as the ones that you're trying to seek, and we're certainly talking about public-private partnerships. I have two metaphors. It's easy as a transportation person to think about highways and rail and air and so forth, and you should pretend that that's the entire world. And I just thought it would be helpful to step back for a second and think about the economics of the firm. Firms take in raw materials, they take labor, capital, and transport, and they create things for final demand. And sort of what we're talking about in the perspective of Walmart or Kmart or Ford is really transport as one of the three pieces of that overall production enterprise, and how changes in the costs of transport affect labor, affect capital. I don't want to go into a long discourse about that, but you've got to keep in mind that when we talk about making these transportation investments, fundamentally, we are giving businesses an opportunity to change their economics, to make it possible for them to do things that they weren't otherwise able to do. Those businesses in China that decide to locate plants here in the United States are looking at that. And they're taking that into account when they make those decisions about where to locate the plants or where to put their distribution centers. That's the way that they look at the world. They don't look at the world as highways or rail. They look at it in terms of a supply chain. The second metaphor is here. It's first outlined in the top right. That if you think about an economy, it's people, manufacturing, and service. I know that someone would lecture me about it's a lot more complicated than that, but I'm trying to use that metaphor for a purpose. The world economy is driven by us. If you take that circle out, it stops. The manufacturing doesn't do anything. The service doesn't do anything. If the people go away, it all stops. We choose to consume. We like food, we like TVs, we like cars. That creates a demand. I suppose we could be like other animals and just eat, and that's the only thing that we do. But we don't have a propensity for doing that. We like to travel to Jamaica. We like to go to Europe. We like to do other things. And that creates a very different kind of enterprise in terms of being a living organism on the planet. And that comes back in this context to say, well, we need to work for somebody so that we have an income so we can spend money, and we either go to manufacturing or go to service. That's why I say somebody would complain about the metaphor. And if we don't happen to have a service here that we want, we'll go someplace else to get it. And that's exactly the purpose of this. This is a state. That box, that rectangle. And this is an adjacent state. And this is another one, and this is another one. I had no purpose in laying that out so it looks like anything at all. But the point is that if there's a service in this state that's of interest to these people, there will be an interchange. And if there's something that's manufactured over here that's not manufactured over here, there will be an interchange. And every once in a while, this country finds that it can't get everything that it wants, or there's somebody else that can provide it to them at a lower price, and so you wind up going over here. That's called balance of trade. And really what we're talking about is the interplay between these, and focusing specifically on transportation as one of those service sector participants, and how that service sector affects the way in which the enterprises play out. We happen to be thinking about that in the context of the nation of this century with its mega regions and the way in which they interrelate to one another. By the way, international companies don't think in terms of those contexts. And the world. We are no longer just Raleigh, North Carolina, and everything is grown here like it was in medieval Europe, and there's no trade to speak of with anybody else in the world. There are products that see the first time all the components in one location when they get delivered to your doorstep. And is it eastbound or is it westbound? Is it through the Suez? Is it through the Panama Canal? Is it across land bridge? Is it coming across Siberia? Is it going this way? Is it going across the Arctic Circle? The number of ways in which those logistics at the world level are going to change in your lifetime is mind-boggling. So we're in North Carolina. And we have a highway network. And we have a rail network. And we have airports. And we have ports. And so the focus at this point is sort of going to draw attention to how you sort those things out in the context of a particular state. So the overall idea summed up here is transportation and logistics, land use, and economic activity, and trying to tie those together. And I find it interesting that land use continues to be the primary focal point. If somebody wants to build a huge automobile plant and you can't get to it with a rail line, or you can't get to it with a highway because they built stuff in between, you're stuck, right? So we need to make investments. We need to facilitate trade. And we need to make investments in personal travel as well. But the transportation investments for trade is a requirement. If you were the emperor of outer blah, 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 right? And you want to have your country earn money, you're going to invest in transportation so you can get goods to market. You might make sure that people can get to work, but you can't provide work unless you can get the goods to market. So if you take a quick look at history, and this is my last slide, in 2600 BC in Egypt is the first recorded paved road. Somebody discovered very dark rock that they wanted to put on pyramids. And it was muddy, so they built a road from a quarry to a lake to the Nile. Transportation of goods. The Roman roads, trade, communications, armies. The Silk Route, trade. The medieval road network through Europe, trade. The Aztec roads, trade. Do you see a theme here? I won't read you all of those, but the motivation for making those investments was trade. It's interesting to me in the context of the United States, we have spent the last 50 years worrying about urban mobility and getting to work and not having to wait in traffic jams. And those of us that grew up in that world think there's nothing else. We talk in terms of percent trucks and hope it's only 2. I mean, we don't, the metaphor change would be that your first task is to understand the freight movements and make sure they are covered. And then as an afterthought, worry about the passenger transportation. Because it's amorphous. It goes everywhere. It's from anywhere to anywhere, particularly in the way the U.S. is organized. And then you would know that you could remain prosperous, that you could get your goods to market, that you could meet the demands of the consumption that we enjoy. And then after the fact, worry about getting people to work. But we've been doing it the other way around for 50 years or so. And I think in many ways what we're doing is returning to our roots. We're saying, oops, maybe we can't just percent trucks our way around the world. We need to pay a little more attention to that. That's my story. I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion. And Gene, you're up.
Thanks, George. It's a pleasure to be with you. I have a lot of friends in the room, so I hope this will be a friendly discussion. I also want to say that Janet was a superstar and is a superstar. We recognize the 3 NC State folks here as being superstars, but when I first met Janet, I knew she was a superstar, and she certainly has turned out to be. And of course, Joe Stevens has become a good friend on the Logistics Task Force and has brought so much energy and passion to the hub and Triad that we're very excited that he's with us in North Carolina, and we hope he stays here a long time and helps us grow this economy. The topic here, transportation as an enabler of economic development, seems like sort of an exercise in stating the obvious, kind of like the sun as a source of light, or and I say this only with the greatest respect for this university, but Duke as the class of ACC basketball.
Ooh, do you need me to punch him?
Please.
And I think,
Actually, I'm a Duke fan.
I think Mark Godfrey's going to change some of that, so we'll see. Since ancient times, you know, and George just went through it, the Phoenician ships and the Roman roads, transportation has been the chief means of building prosperity, at least beyond the little bands that we used to all roam around in thousands of years ago. So thanks to globalization over the last 40 years, now more than ever, we see how we're all connected to people and businesses and countries around the world. And so North Carolina's infrastructure is not just our highway and rail system and our ports and airports. It's really part of this vast global network of the flow of goods and services around. And the connection has made us be more competitive if we want to survive, if we want to prosper. So when businesses seek out new locations, they don't just look at the local map or the state map, they look at the globe. And infrastructure is one of the primary considerations. One of our primary jobs at North Carolina DOT, and certainly the governor has committed to this because she created the Logistics Task Force for this very reason, is to build and provide a diverse and effective and integrated transportation network that helps businesses choose North Carolina and helps the businesses that are here do better in this global economy. So since 2007, when the General Assembly commissioned the statewide logistics plan, and when Governor Perdue heard about it in early 2009, when I started talking to her about it, she said, yeah, let's get on that. Let's do that. That's something we need to really focus on. So it really supports the whole idea of helping us create jobs, recruit industry, and keep the jobs we have here. Identified several issues in that study related to our work that we can and should directly be involved in economic development. This is not a sideline for us. This is part of our day-to-day work to support the economy of this state and to help it grow. That we work regularly with the Department of Commerce on our plans and our outreach strategies, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, specifics about how we do that. That we need to be much more proactive and less reactive. We're not just responding to interest. We're looking at the system we have and figuring out where the next investments needs to be attractive in the world economy. And we need to be engaged globally, as I've said. So Joe Stevens and I and others joined this task force last year, and we're making good progress. We've made sort of some interim recommendations to the governor, and we'll continue to roll forward. This is not the kind of task force that meets for a while and then issues a report that goes on the shelf. This is a task force that's developing recommendations and trying to move them forward as we get developed. So let me talk about a couple of examples of what we've done here in recent years, and I'll quit. The Charlotte Douglas International Airport, in partnership with this department, our department, and Norfolk Southern Railroad, we are developing there a whole set of infrastructure investments, a third parallel runway, a rail freight terminal located right in the airport, a major air cargo complex. We used a similar approach in eastern North Carolina at the Global Trans Park to attract Spirit Aerosystems with the investment in air, rail, and surface transportation. And as Joe knows, we've tried to help the whole development of that Triad hub in the same way, investing in the airport, investing in the roadway system, and investing in the rail system that serves that part of the state and the East Coast. So we think transportation spending and investment is a win-win. It builds our infrastructure. It creates jobs right now. We just signed the agreement last month, some of you may have read about, with Norfolk Southern and the North Carolina Railroad to invest $461 million in the Charlotte to Raleigh corridor. That's going to help us build our passenger service in that corridor, but it's also going to improve the ability of the freight railroads to operate. We're adding 100% capacity between Charlotte and Greensboro for freight, and we're going to use 4% of that for passengers. So we think that's going to help continue to help the Triad develop, to help Charlotte develop, and to help Raleigh develop. You're really building that corridor across the Piedmont of our state, linking all those places together in a much more direct way and linking us to the world economy. So we're excited about what we're up to. We're excited about the partners we have. We think we've got some good ideas moving forward. We think we're building the foundations of partnerships that will be successful. And I look forward to the further dialogue. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Joe Stevens. I'm honored to be a participant on this distinguished panel. I'm thankful to be here with you tonight. For those of you who don't know me, I'm from the state of Indiana, where we have a boatload more cornfields than we do trees. So I'm battling the pollen, so please bear with me. Dr. George List asked me if I would come and talk a little bit about the benefits of the private and the public sector actually working together. My background is I work at FedEx Express, been with the company for 23 years now. I have participated on the construction of every major sort location around the globe since the early 90s. That includes Guangzhou, China, Charles de Gaulle, France, facilities up in Canada, Indianapolis, AFW, Oakland, Anchorage, and most recently Greensboro, North Carolina, and the Triad. So I have a little bit of experience in the benefits between the public and the private sector working together. And today I thought the most beneficial case study would be Indianapolis. And at FedEx, obviously our strengths are our people, our hub and spoke distribution system with an integrated air-ground transportation network, and then our unsurpassed physical and virtual network. We transport more than 8.5 million packages a day. Not a year, not a week, a day. So transportation is truly the lifeblood of what we do. Whether it's on the ground, whether it's on ocean, in ocean containers, whether it's on rail, or whether it's in the air, that's what we do, and that's the lifeblood of our network. We serve more than 220 countries around the globe. We have approximately 290,000 employees, operating around 80,000 vehicles each business day. We operate 80,000 motorized vehicles and flying 697 airplanes each business day. So, for this particular example, I wanted to show you, and this is a very good illustration. The facility that we constructed in Indianapolis, we went there for a reason, and a lot of Dr. List. My best friend is Dr. George, so I keep calling him.
That works.
George never puts his disclaimer. I guess there is similarity.
Oh, my God. Perfect joke setup.
I love Dr. George, both of them. In Indianapolis, we purposely constructed the facility there, and there are several reasons. One is the amount of land and the resources that come along with that. The highway infrastructure that is in the state of Indiana. It is one of the largest, if not the largest in the United States in terms of connectivity to the rest of the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And the airport. And as you can see by this photograph right here, this is actually the Indianapolis facility. And the other reason that we went there is for growth opportunities. And can anybody look at that picture and tell me what the problem is?
We got one runway.
One runway? Well, you can only see one runway. There's actually two. Three, actually.
You don't have any other land to expand the sun?
Sorry?
It looks like your site is sort of constrained there. You don't have any other land to expand.
It is. It's this highway right here. This is Interstate 70 in the state of Indiana. And it kind of wedges into runway 23 left. So it created a pretty significant challenge. And in order for us to grow, that interstate needed to go. A lot of people go.
Oh, okay. Bring the bulldozers.
To give you a little bit of background in Indianapolis, some of the milestones. We opened that facility in October of 1988. We have executed 7 expansion projects completed to date. Expansion 5 was the single largest in our company's history in 1998 at a cost or a price tag of $300 million. Phase 6 was completed in 2000, which simply included the expansion of our international operation, growing it to 12,000 pieces per hour. And then Phase 7. We got to Phase 7. We needed to keep growing. The economy was booming. It was the mid-90s. It was a period of time where everybody didn't have a desktop at home. Not everybody had a laptop. And the cell phone industry was absolutely taking off. How many of you remember the bag phone? Remember? You got your bag phone, you paid $300 or $400 for it, you thought you were cool even if anybody wasn't
I don't
on
care,
the
it's
line,
me.
still drove down your
I'm like,
But the evolution was growing, and we went from the bag phone to the Razor and then the iPhone, and we've gone from the Commodore 64 to the 400 megahertz laptop now to the iPad. So technology was evolving significantly, and we were right in the middle of the mix. And a lot of this product was actually developed overseas, and in order for it to get to the U.S.-based consumer, which is the single largest consumer base in the entire world, it had to come through one of our gateways. A lot of people don't realize this, but every iPod, you got the iPhone, the iPod, and the iPad. Every iPod purchased in the United States and Asia 5 years ago transited this facility. Every single one, to the tune of 75,000 to 80,000 a day.
Wow.
So we were growing. We needed to grow. However, we could not grow until we actually moved or figured out a way to navigate around Interstate 70. And we remained steadfast in our commitment to ensure every customer experience was outstanding. We had to work with local and national government on embracing globalization because of the evolution of the economics, macroeconomics. We had to make sure we had diligent focus on transborder exportation, capitalizing on opportunities associated with imports simultaneously, and most importantly, maintain our focus on creating jobs and general economic growth, not just in North Carolina, not just in Indiana, not just in the United States, but in the United States and abroad. In addition to that, trade liberalization right here in the U.S., along with modernization of regulatory agencies, specifically like U.S. Customs and Border Protection, which is one of the things that's on our plate right now. Now, back to Indianapolis in a case study. I already gave it away. Initially, we purchased this facility from Pure Later Courier back in 1988. We could park 28 airplanes and process 33,000 pieces per hour. We bought this because we thought, wow, look at all that land from where we are to the end of the runway and the things that we could accomplish. Then we grew 5 phases later, and we started to recognize, it's really not that much land, and there's a wedge, and we've got an obstacle in our way, and what are we going to do? Essentially, we needed to support 76 flights versus the previous 62 that are noted on this particular slide. We needed to be able to process 201 truck routes in a day, also requiring surface transportation and infrastructure. We needed to be able to process about 500,000 pieces a day at this particular one facility, and we needed to do it at a rate of about 195,000 pieces per hour. It was going to be a $140 million investment on our part, and was. It was going to add 600,000 square feet to the existing facility, and it did. It was going to allow us or enable us to park 14 additional aircraft, growing from 62 to 76. And it was going to generate a 33% increase in the capacity of that particular facility and grow jobs by 1,000. And I want to stop here right now. That's 1,000 jobs just at FedEx alone. When you talk about expanding a facility 600,000 square feet, when you talk about increasing capacity by 33%, and you're talking about the technology that we use, every time we do an expansion, we're stimulating jobs. We're creating jobs, and we're stimulating economic growth. And we typically have an expansion or a construction project going on at all times. While we were building and opening the facility on the express side and the Triad, we were negotiating a new facility on the FedEx ground side of the house, also in the Triad, one in Greensboro, one in Kernersville. So we're constantly executing construction projects. What that does is that allows individuals in construction or with technology background to participate in our construction networks, help us grow, stimulate, and create jobs in their industry, and at the same time create long-term jobs at FedEx. And a significant number of our employee population were actually contractors at FedEx helping us build a facility. Who better to help you operate and run a facility than the person who helped you build it? Also, in this particular expansion, we were able to double the size of our facility, growing international capability, growing from 12,000 pieces per hour to 24,000 pieces per hour. Now, we figured out a way, we mapped it out, and we said we can do this. We can create the environment that we need. We can create we can squeeze in the facilities that we need, and we can squeeze in the aircraft parking that we need. However, when you add airplanes and you add conveyors and you add or conveyances like truck routes, you have to have a place to park them. On those particular conveyances, airplanes and trucks are containers. You have to have a place to store them, whether it's on what we call a dolly or a static rack. So we needed more real estate continuing on to the west to put storage equipment to help support the equipment coming in and the equipment going out. So therefore, we worked with the appropriate individuals at the DOT, NDOT, and we created a fast-track I-70 project. And basically what we did simultaneously with the Indianapolis airport, which was outdated, is we worked with the government, we worked with the airport, and we said, if you pick up and you move Interstate 70 to where it runs parallel with runway 23 left, we can continue to expand, we will continue to expand, we can have more goods coming into this particular market, and by simply having this building in that state with the ability to grow, stimulated an entire, a whole nother warehousing and distribution and 3PL business model just west of the airport. You've been there, correct? Mm-hmm. And we have a facility called the Ameriplex south of the airport, and we have another facility called our business conglomerate called the Plainfield Warehousing and Distribution Centers that are just west of the airport to the end of the runway. Where I used to ride motorcycles when I was a little kid through the woods and the creeks and the hills and the hollers is now nothing more than pop-up warehousing and distribution centers everywhere you can see. And it's all because we were able to successfully work with the appropriate individuals, get the appropriate funding, and pick up that highway and actually move it. And here's an aerial photo or interpretation of exactly what we did of the actual airport outside the CAD drawing to show you what we did. And while we were actually working on this particular project, the airport was able to piggyback on that, and now, not displayed in this picture, is in this area right here is a brand new midfield terminal, now known as the Indianapolis International Airport. If you ever have an opportunity to go, it's one of the state-of-the-art. So it created opportunities and jobs for the airport. It created opportunities and jobs for those who actually helped pick up and move the interstate. It was really heavy and it required a lot of people. We were able to expand, which in turn created long-term jobs within our corporation. And we have a long-term vision to continue to grow. So as long as the information is there, as long as you have a master plan, and as long as you maintain your commitment, you can accomplish great things. And this is the max site plan for the facility in Indianapolis, Indiana in the future, which will now enable us to grow from the original 33 flights that we had, or 28 flights we had been able to park there when we originally purchased the facility back in 1988 to 147 flights, and growing from 33,000 pieces per hour to 276,000 pieces per hour at our max site time period. I'm going to skip through this, basically because I've already talked to it. Basically, when you talk about transportation and logistics is about access, right? Access is the collapsing of space and time and the expansion of information, which is key in the interaction and exchange among people, businesses, and nations. Access enables companies, both large and small, to consider the entire world their marketplace. So when you talk about transportation and you talk about a road or a rail track that connects Charlotte to Greensboro or Greensboro to Raleigh, you're not just talking about the benefits to the state of North Carolina or those three conglomerate cities. You're talking about the benefit to the rest of the world because of something that came in on a slow boat over in Wilmington that ended up getting on an airplane and flying to Raleigh, which then got on a truck and went down to Charlotte or Greensboro that went to the end consumer. So when you look at it from a macro level perspective, which I think that's what we need to do, and I think that's to the point that I sincerely apologize, Janet was making. That's what it's about. It's not just about that one rail or that one road or the traffic decongestion that you can incorporate. It's about trade and it's about jobs and it's about economic growth, and it truly is an engine. And the reason that I chose Indianapolis, and I briefly touched on this, Indianapolis has the most vast integrated highway network in the United States, coupled with land, which makes it an attractive site to become the logistics capital of the United States. And because of my experience back there and the things that we've been able to accomplish, I was fortunate enough to be asked to participate with Secretary Conti on the Governor Perdue's logistics task force, along with Dr. List here. And these are exactly the points we're trying to make. In the state of North Carolina, there is a huge opportunity with the highway network as it exists and based upon the future plans, along with the land and the resources and the individuals and most importantly, the universities, which I'll talk to in just a second. I promise you I'm hurrying. I was told 5 to 8 minutes, and I practiced this 20 times, and I did it in 6. And I was way overblown. 80%, also in Indianapolis, 80% of the population in Canada, the U.S., and 60% of the major U.S. business markets are within a day's truck from that particular city, which is why that made this an absolutely extraordinary case study. And the same could be used in the state of North Carolina. When you talk about Raleigh, you talk about Charlotte, you talk about the Triad, and you talk about the infrastructure that connects all three, along with the ports over on the coast, and then the trucking connectivity up from the far northeast all the way down to Disneyland, or it's Disney World here in Florida. We've been successful because of collaborative efforts between FedEx, the appropriate government officials, business leaders, obviously the academic community, and the development of a steadfast strategy to capitalize on the strengths in that particular arena. The design also, not just in terms of our business model and economic development, we also worked with the academic representatives to create key curriculums to eliminate brain drain. One of the problems we had in the state of Indiana, weather is not so good there if you have never been there. And you had the airlines that were going bust. You had manufacturing, which was migrating offshore. So we had these wonderful universities in Purdue and IU and Indiana State, and who would have ever imagined that a Purdue alum in a Big Ten conference would be here in ACC at NC State talking. But we worked with the academic societies to work on curriculums to help keep people in the state of Indiana. So unlike me, they wouldn't graduate and migrate and go somewhere else. In addition to that, remaining steadfast in our commitment to continue growth to our customers, employees, and communities alike. With that, I'm going to stop because I know I'm way past my time frame. And 6 minutes? That was 6 minutes? No way. Yes.
Oh, I did my shtick.
Go ahead.
My pen exploded.
Questions from the audience?
A question to Joe. Who paid for
The
that?
right color for NC State.
I know, there you go.
Sorry?
The highway relocation, how was that funded?
It was a combination of tax dollars as well as private dollars in the local community.
Was there any controversy about that at all? Or
The single largest component of controversy was bats,
That's
environmental.
Their bat habitat.
push back there too.
Question
I
here.
wondered all the benefits and advantages of the transportation expansion and infrastructure that you did. Much larger footprint and much more transportation going on, the aircraft and the trucks. Did you have to sell it to the community? I mean, I would think that there is such a significant impact that
Well,
a sales job, and what are your key sales points in doing that?
Absolutely. Well, the key sales points are having a strategy. And when you work for a corporation like ours, and you're as immersed in the community as you are, very similar to what we did, and Gene, Secretary Conti, I apologize, made reference to in the with respect to the facility we have in the Triad. There's a step-by-step process that you go through, and you have to come up with, you have to jointly work on economic development committees to say, okay, here is our strategy. And then you do a proof of concept. And we're able to demonstrate that. We're able to help the state demonstrate that based upon projects we've completed elsewhere. And we came up with a master plan. It's kind of like a master plan community. When you go to develop a set of woods or a cornfield, and you're going to develop a master planned housing community, if you want people to buy in, you got to show where the road's going to be. You got to show there's going to be a tennis court or a swimming pool or a soccer field or a combination of the three. And it's kind of the same concept where you have to work with the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, which is comprised of business leaders in the local community. You have to work with the various politicians in terms of the DOT as well as the governor and the mayor. And you all have to come together, and you've got to come forward, and you've got to say, okay, especially in a time when you have complete economic unrest, when Chrysler's pulling out and General Motors is pulling out, and the airlines are going one by one. Who remembers Braniff? Who remembers TWA? Who remembers United Airlines and the facility they constructed in Indiana that is now a conglomerate of maintenance organizations working in what used to be their facility? You have to come up with a plan, and you go out and you communicate that, and you educate. And based upon that, and you get some small successes and wins under your belt, and you make sure that you publicly document that and communicate that so that people understand that they made the right decision and we need to keep going. During the most recent economic recession, one of the locations in the United States who didn't suffer as much as most is the state of Indiana. One of the states in the United States that still has a surplus while most have a deficit is the state of Indiana.
I was just curious, what's the perspective of the panel about the most effective sort of future use and operations of our ports in North Carolina? I was at a Southern District meeting this past weekend, and there was some information shared there about, I guess, the magnitude of what's happening in Norfolk in terms of planning for the Panamax expansion. The same thing with Savannah and Charleston. And we're a very small element of that. So I guess in terms of North Carolina, what should be our niche in terms of how we further develop our port?
Anybody want to take a shot at that?
Yeah. And Pam Townsend's in the back. She's co-leading a major maritime study that we have underway. But yeah, we have, I think, and part of this comes out of the logistics task force discussion about, where are our ports today? Where should they be headed? What should we be doing to support whatever direction that is? There was a lot of local controversy down about the international terminal near Southport, and it kind of all blew up because I don't think they had done the kind of things that Joe was just talking about in terms of building that local community support and business support. So what we've done is engaged a couple of national firms, AECOM and URS, teamed up, and we're going to have a good hard look at our situation, look at Norfolk, look at Savannah, look at Jacksonville. I mean, we're looking up and down the East Coast and saying, what's everybody else trying to do? I mean, if I've been to the Norfolk Hampton Roads port, and it's awesome what they have done, but they started 25 years ago, 35 years ago. So we ain't going to catch them in the next 5 years. So we need to figure out what is our strategy, as Joe said, and then how do we execute that strategy? And it's going to take a public-private partnership because there's not enough public money to do it, and there's nobody in the private sector that's going to step up by themselves and do it. So we've got to have that strategy. We've got to figure it out. We're hoping to have the major part of that study done by the end of this year, and then we'll have a good, hopefully, public discussion about it and move forward.
It's a good question. Other questions? Yes, Joe.
For Janet, wondering if there's anything that you sense in Washington, any other funding mechanism besides raising the gas tax that's getting any kind of conversation or any kind of traction?
There are a couple of things that are happening now. First, this is not directly related to your question. There's a lot of talk about leverage. You're going to hear that from every member. In fact, I believe I heard Barbara Boxer say leverage is the new black. So in the absence of revenue, hey, we're going to give you guys the tools to go out and get lower cost loans and private equity, and isn't that great? But I remind people consistently that the last time I checked, when you take out a loan, you still have to pay back the principal and interest, and that requires revenue. And when you use private capital. They want a return on that capital, and that also requires revenue. And I did not have to go to business school for that, but for some reason, every once in a while when I say it, it sounds more convincing, because I say, well, you know, I do have an MBA. I think we are in that period of trying to get through denial. Hi, Joe. I see Joe Malasso just snuck in. And by the way, I'm now bleeding NC State red because my pen blew up on me. So yes, I'm well aware my hands are red. Oh, I'm sorry. What do I have to do?
Wolfpack.
Oh, good God. I mean, look, at least you guys are Wolfpack. I mean, look, Stanford, the color is the mascot, right? Cardinal, the color, not the bird. It's very strange. We're leading a lot of people through the valley of denial, not just the river where the first roads were in Egypt, and saying, okay, so at the end of the road, we know that if you want to significantly increase federal funding, we're going to have to grapple with this gas tax question, but you can't start there. So what else is there? Well, first people start talking about tolls, and I remind them that that's project-based revenue, that's not federal revenue. AASHTO has a whole list of potential revenue sources. One that gets thrown out a lot, for example, is customs user fees. But the last time I checked, Customs and Border Patrol says they're underfunded. So I'm not sure how you fight that budget battle. So yeah, it's out there, but there are a lot of what we end up calling offsets, but it's going to be harder to get at those. One of the things that's being floated right now that Senator Wyden from Oregon is looking at is issuing a particular kind of bond and just distributing those dollars to the states. And the way the whole proposal is structured, it's a very low cost to the federal government, but provides some revenues to fill that hole that's coming in the trust fund. It is a complicated proposal. It's going to take some time to sell. So I think until you start seeing the charts come out that say, here's how much you're going to get, and it's not very much, we're having a really hard time getting people to focus on that question of revenue. They don't want to see us coming and hear us talking about it. They don't want to hear that ultimate truth. And I've got a whole bookcase of studies, 2 congressionally chartered commissions, National Academy of Sciences, you know what. Everybody's come up with the same answer. And I keep going in, and staff and members say there's got to be something else. And I really think they think that we're hiding something. Like, I have the answer. It's in my purse. You got to just ask me enough times, and I'm going to open it up and go, woo, I've got my revenue solution. Trust me, if I had that solution, I would not be doing this anymore. We'd be moving on to the sun of, safety leaders. So people are grasping at whatever they can. And if you have come up with any brilliant ideas, now is the time to really put those forward. Because at the federal level, if you want a trust fund that is funded by user fees, which is what's necessary to support contract authority and multi-year transportation bills and protect the highway trust fund against raids by other programs, you have to have something you can collect from a whole lot of people. And that becomes the issue. There are a whole lot of revenues I could use if I didn't want a trust fund funded by user fees that supported contract authority. If we want to throw transportation in with the rest of the budget, this is more my concern over, there's a lot of talk about multimodal funding. There's a lot of demand for that. And I think at the end of the day, that's an important thing. But we have budgetary constraints we're dealing with. And as soon as you throw transportation up against health care, Department of Interior, even the Defense Department, we're going to lose. So it's a tough situation. Long answer to your short question. Sorry about that. Do you have an answer? Do you have
No.
I
looked in your purse.
Is it an exploding pen of red ink? Metaphor?
PRB and through the NCHRP has done a couple of really good studies, which I finished one this morning, and I'm going to get through the other one hopefully in the next couple of days. But on VMT, on vehicle miles traveled, and how you would implement, and all the different variations of how you could do it. I mean, it's doable. Where the political will is, I don't know. But, somebody in the 50s figured out the gas tax could fund this big interstate system that actually was developed in the Roosevelt administration, and then, you know, the Eisenhower folks came along and said, aha, I think I can figure out how to pay for this. Well, we can figure out how to pay for infrastructure with the technologies we have and all that. I mean, there are privacy concerns and blah, 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 but it's doable. We just need to find some political will to say where we are ain't going to get us there, so we need to figure out something new.
Might the place to pilot test that be in the freight arena?
It's working.
Where it's a smaller community of
Yeah.
folks who could possibly see some economic benefits associated with doing that, if there were some incentives tied to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I know people talk about weight distance taxes as being just another level of taxation on top of the other. But if there was some way to create some incentives to go in with that.
Yeah, these two studies talk a lot about that, and certainly what's been done in Europe and some parts of Asia and other places on the freight side. You know, you sort of guarantee levels of service to people, and they're willing to pay, because Joe can tell you if he knows something's going to get from point A to B in the right time, then he factors that cost into his equation. But if he doesn't know when it's going to get there, then the uncertainty is the real issue.
This is for Joe. I'm assuming, Joe, you know about the intermodal terminal being built down at Charlotte. Whether you have a lot of knowledge about that or not, even just an observation, what kind of take do you have on that? What do they need to do to be successful with that?
I think marketing is going to be key. It goes back to what I was talking about previously with respect to some of the accomplishments in some of the other areas that I've been. This can't be a look at me. It needs to be a look at us, and this is what we're going to be able to accomplish. And if you're truly going to capitalize on it, you've got to get out and you've got to sell it to. Well, let me just back up. One of the things in the state of, I'm going to go back to the state of Indiana real quick. One of the things that makes the state of Indiana highly successful is we have transplants over in Asia. And we're working with those companies and we're saying, look, if you're looking to expand your homegrown business, we want you to come to Indianapolis, Indiana. Or the state of it, not Indianapolis, the state of Indiana. And we'll bring them over once every 6 months, and we'll give them a tour of the state of Indiana for those individuals who are looking to expand. And that's when you have an opportunity to market your toys and say, look at what we have in terms of warehousing and distribution. Look at what we have in terms of air infrastructure. Look at what we have in terms of a surface infrastructure, both rail and highway. And I think those are some of the things that need to become more public when it comes to what we're doing down in Charlotte, getting out and making sure that that's truly being marketed, and we're competing with Indiana. You know, we have this land, we have this highway infrastructure, we have this new terminal. Here's how the moving pieces and parts come together to turn it into a well-oiled machine, and here's why you should come here.
Mr. Secretary, you might have some comments on that too.
Well, I think Joe hit it. I mean, it's really making the investments, showing that they work, that there's an advantage, and then marketing the hell out of it.
We can take one more question.
Yeah, I was wondering if the eastern and western parts of the state are being left out of the equation, or whether the logistics task force is addressing those that are not as well served by transportation.
No, I think actually this whole look at the two ports is a big part of, eastern North Carolina, the future of eastern North Carolina. So I think that's a focus. We had a couple of good meetings out in western North Carolina, talked about the whole location of Asheville, and all those communities around there are very well situated. If you look at the whole East Coast between, Atlanta and Washington, Asheville's like right in that mix. So I think there's great potential for western North Carolina, eastern North Carolina, but we do have this spine down the Piedmont that we've got to continue to invest in as well. So it's a challenge of, you don't want to get too far out in front and just have eastern and western North Carolina dry up, but you've got to make sure that spine stays strong, that strong back in the state has to be there, and then you build off of that.
Thank you.
We should express a deep debt of gratitude to our speakers. I think they've really provided.
Put this back on.
Okay. Well, it is about time, and first I would like to thank our panel and Dr. George. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
I like that. Dr. George is good.
Every year we celebrate a new scholarship for the Transportation Founder Fund, and this is something I look forward to. And I would like to ask Thomas Chase. Thomas, would you please come up? Thomas is the 2011 recipient of the Transportation Founders Fund. And, at the end of the day, this is all about our students and about having them interact with our folks here and really absorbing the knowledge and the wisdom. Thomas is a first-year master's student with a concentration in transportation engineering. He works at ITRI as a research assistant and working on an NCDOT project on mobility and reliability, something that is very important to many of us. Thomas was an undergraduate here at NC State with a CE degree in May 2010 and a 3.5 GPA. He graduated cum laude and was on the Dean's List for 5 semesters, and he was active in the University Scholar Program as an undergrad. He is in his 3rd year membership at NC State, ITE, and ASCE. He's been at TRB, he's been in Sao Paulo, Brazil, building homes, constructing homes. And he does enjoy hiking and going to the beach with his wife, Katie. And he's a new dad with his 7-month-old friend. So please join me in congratulating Thomas Chase.
Yeah.
This is a real
Get him a big Sharpie to sign it.
big thing. Yes, we do have gifts. We have some gifts for our panel. Jean? NC State.
All right.
You're forward.
Oh.
Yes, Jim, that's for you.
We got a problem.
See that? Oh, somebody always
That was
uses it.
for
Which one is this? Janet?
Janet.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes. Joe, thank you very much. Thank you.
And Dr. George.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think that concludes our session this evening. Again, we appreciate everybody coming. Hope you had a good time like we did with this, and look forward to seeing you next year. So thank you and safe travels.